Welcome to the KISSBCP webinar series, where we discuss all things that relate to no building scenarios, to no people scenarios, no third-party supplier scenarios, and lastly, no systems, all combined to create Chaos the Dragon, which is battled by King Phoenix and his shield.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Don Brennan with Continuity Insights, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Turbocharge or BCP, which will be presented by Tam Williams of Kingsbridge BCP. The coronavirus is affecting nearly every aspect of our daily lives, and when it comes to our businesses, we've seen that while business continuity planning was important pre-virus, it's playing an even bigger role in our day-to-day activities. We can definitely use some help. But the question is, what kind of help do each of us need? During Turbocharge or BCP, Tam Williams will discuss the merits and pitfalls of BCP software and various services so that you can decide if there's a fit for your business, your requirements, and your budget. The goal of today's webinar is to deliver the information you need to identify the best solution for you, which may even mean no solution at all. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that you will have the opportunity to participate in today's webinar by submitting questions through the questions pane of your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them at the end of today's broadcast. In addition, if you feel your question may require a more detailed explanation that can be adequately covered here, be sure to email Tam with your question and she will respond to you directly. Today's webinar will also be recorded for later on-demand viewing, and as a registered participant, you will receive a link to this recording. I would now like to introduce today's speaker. Tam Williams is a skilled and experienced business continuity consultant working with Kingsbridge BCP. She has honed her skills over the past 2 decades in a number of industries, including healthcare, research, information technology, manufacturing, and finance. During that time, she has facilitated business continuity workshops and delivered presentations at a number of business continuity conferences throughout North America, and she's excited to be joining us for today's presentation. Please welcome Tam Williams.
Thanks, Don, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm happy to be here today presenting on a topic that is a struggle for a lot of organizations. When and where do you invest to make your BCP better and make your life as a BC planner easier? And maybe most importantly, how do you know whether you and your organization might benefit from BCP software services? And what exactly should you be looking for or avoiding depending on the characteristics of your organization? So before we jump into the topic for today, let me just tell you a little bit about Kingsbridge BCP, the organization I work for. So there's some background or context for the information I'm presenting today. We are a business continuity software and services company. We've been operating in the business continuity space since 1983. Our feature product is our Shield software as a solution for developing, maintaining, and hosting your business continuity plan. With that tool, we also offer a suite of communication tools to help you stay in touch with your organization, as well as a mobile app that syncs with our SaaS tool so that you always have a current copy of your plan, even if there's no internet or cell service. While our primary focus now is on software, we still provide a range of professional services, including BCP mentoring hours that we provide included with a subscription to our Shield SaaS tool, among other services. So I deliver the services and I help with making improvements to our software. So I'll be speaking from what I and our other consultants see in the BCP space every day. So our agenda looks like this. First, we'll talk a little bit about how we've seen the BCP landscape change over the years and how this is impacting the organizations we work with. I'll then talk about 4 typical types of clients we work with and how we've seen software and services meet their needs or not. And then we'll wrap things up with a few take-home messages and then hopefully have some time at the end for your questions. So let's start with the BCP landscape. Well, of course, we can state the obvious that we have a little pandemic going on right now. And if that hasn't kept you busy, then we can look at hurricane season, which is at the top of many minds these days. 2019 marked the 9th consecutive year with 8 or more billion-dollar disasters, and was the 5th consecutive year in which 10 or more billion-dollar weather and climate disaster events affected the United States. So it's no wonder then that we're seeing an influx of clients coming to us because their clients are asking to see their business continuity plans. BCPs are becoming a major component of vendor compliance, so more and more we're seeing relatively tiny companies, even less than 5 people, coming to us in need of a BCP. Equally, sectors such as credit unions that have managed to dodge their BCP requirements because their auditor just didn't focus on it before or didn't really take a serious look at the content of their plan are now coming to us to get help with bringing their plan up to date or ensuring it checks all the boxes. So the small mom and pop businesses that never heard of BCP are now needing it, and the larger companies that knew they might need it someday are now facing the music. So the diversity of our client base has really grown, and with that comes a diverse set of needs. No longer is BCP exclusive to large companies and specific sectors. So no longer can a one-size-fits-all software or services solution meet everyone's needs. So to compare and contrast the needs of this increasingly diverse client base, we're going to talk about 4 main types of clients by considering 2 main factors. First, whether or not there's any internal BCP expertise within the organization. And second, the size or the complexity of that organization. Now, determining whether you have any internal expertise in the BCP space in your organization is fairly straightforward. Either your folks know this stuff or they don't. Have they completed a threat risk assessment or a business impact analysis before? Have they written a plan? Have they executed a plan? Have they been part of a business continuity program before? These questions will quickly get you an answer to whether or not you have any expertise in-house. Size and complexity is a tougher characteristic to define. While typically small companies need simpler solutions, large companies can also get away with simpler solutions depending on the complexity of what they deliver and how they're structured. Well, often in our office, we consider small companies, at least from a BCP perspective, kind of in around 50 or less people. We're going to look at an exception to this rule. So take these 2 200-person companies. Company A has 200 employees. They have 50 different products they produce, 75 suppliers, and hundreds of customers. This company is likely to have a lot of business processes, a lot of departments covering off their various product lines, perhaps lots of different lines of manufacturing to produce these products, and a complex distribution network potentially for their hundreds of customers, some of which may be a higher priority than others. The business impact analysis for this company is going to be quite involved. There's going to be a lot of prioritization that will need to take place to determine which product lines are more important to get back first, which customers need to be serviced first. There may be different recovery strategies that lend themselves better to different products, and communication strategies are going to be more involved given the sheer number of suppliers and customers. Now, we look at company B, still 200 employees, but in this case, there's only 3 products because they have a lot of employees working to produce the same product and many doing the same thing. They may have very few departments and management staff that are going to be directly involved in recovery. Prioritization of critical processes may be more straightforward. There will be very few recovery strategies involved, and communications will be more straightforward as well. Company B will have less complex needs than Company A, both from a software and a professional services perspective. In fact, Company B has the potential to get oversold a solution they don't really need because what appears somewhat large and potentially complex on the surface is actually quite simple and straightforward underneath. So we're going to speak about 4 different client types today. Those that are small or simple and have no BCP expertise in-house that you'll see in the bottom left of this quadrant. And as you look up to the right-hand corner, we have our large, complex organizations with lots of in-house expertise. What I hope is that all of you will be able to identify kind of where you fall in this quadrant and find a few take-home considerations from today's presentation that you can then apply to your efforts to turbocharge your BCP. So let's start with the client that you would think would never go looking for consulting services or software. These are the small organizations with all the internal expertise they need. Generally, our assumption that they are not going to need software holds true. They likely don't have a large amount of information to work with. The frequency with which this information changes may not be very high, so they can likely manage with potentially a simple document that they update and share across their recovery team members. The biggest downsides to software for a small company are 2. It can be costly for the frequency with which they're going to use it. And depending on the solution purchased, it can be too complicated, requiring too much training and orientation, again, for the amount of time they're actually going to spend using the tool. Now, having said that, there are some considerations that may push a small organization toward investing in BCP software. First is security. Depending on the type of organization you work in, there may be information in your plan that is not for all eyes to see. Perhaps there's financial information that's not for the eyes of your manufacturing team, or emergency contact information for employees that is really just for HR to see. Software can add levels of permission so that you establish who can see what information in the plan, leaving the finance team feeling comfortable that the information they enter will only be seen by members of the finance team. Access is another factor to consider. How are recovery teams expected to access their plan? What if they're at home and when bad things happen? Can the plan be accessed from wherever they are, even if the company's network goes down or they lose connectivity? On the other hand, is the plan too easily accessed because it's a paper document or a USB key in the trunk of their car and at risk of loss or theft? The right software solution can address these issues. Lastly, if you're in an industry that has a number of compliance boxes that need to be ticked, consider how you're going to demonstrate to your auditors when information was last modified in your plan, that the information is secure, and that your response teams are familiar with their plan. Software can also assist with this. As well as just overall efficiency, you're going to find that anytime you have software in place, your plan's going to come together a little more quickly and be maintained a little more easily. So while small companies can typically get away without software, if one of these considerations applies to you and you do want to go down the software path, here are a few features you might want to keep in mind. First, to ensure access to your plan, get something that's hosted so it's not on the very servers that may be damaged during a disaster. In conjunction with that, connectivity to hosted plans has its own risks when that connection is lost. So you may also want to consider a mobile app that puts a local copy of your plan on the mobile device for your team members. If there's information in your recovery plan that is not for all eyes, make sure the user permissions allow you to isolate information so that users see what they need to see and secure information remains secure. I can't emphasize enough finding a solution that is easy to use. And if you have any concerns about ease of use, get some training thrown in. If your software provider is going to charge you for training or tells you that your training is going to take multiple full days, then this tool is probably way more complicated than what you need as a small organization. Especially if you have internal expertise in the BCP space, you shouldn't need much help to get started. Along the same lines, don't get oversold on complex threat risk assessments or business impact analysis features. As a small or simple organization, your TRA and BIA are probably going to be pretty straightforward. You'll need them to tick any compliance boxes, and they will certainly help you with your plan development and subsequent exercising. But ultimately, in a small, fairly straightforward organization, you have very few factors to consider, so you don't need the assistance of a fancy tool to analyze your results in order to get your plan together. To make your auditors happy, you might want to consider some sort of analytics that will show you when sections of your plan were last modified and when users last logged in to review their plans. And lastly, don't buy more storage space than you need. Your BCP should hold whatever documentation you need until you can get your own file management systems back up and running. Straightforward documents take up very little space. Don't be sold on more storage space than you need. Now, let's look at the professional service needs of a small organization that already has internal expertise. Again, the needs for services could potentially be quite low here if you have in-house skill sets. In fact, you could end up spending money on consultants to put a plan together that your own resources could have done themselves. So if you're a small organization and you have in-house expertise, is there any need to pay for professional services? There are a few things you may want to consider. First, in a small organization, everyone tends to wear a lot of hats, and this includes the individual in charge of business continuity. Rarely in a small organization do you find a resource who's 100% dedicated to BCP. It tends to be that kind of hot potato responsibility that everyone gladly passes along to somebody else whenever the opportunity arises so that they can get to doing what they consider their real job. So consider the role and workload of your in-house expertise. We have a large percentage, and I would say even a growing percentage of clients that are on the smaller side that come to us because they've been trying to get their BCP written for 2 or 3 years now, but other things always come up and it lowers the priority. They just don't get around to it. Eventually, they just come to us to get the job done. So whether or not you have the expertise in-house, you may still need some outside help to make up for any resource constraints. Hiring consultants can also help provide a bit of an impartial perspective. These days, our pandemic, along with hurricanes and cyber attacks, are dominating the BCP discussions. Where I'm located in Ottawa, Canada, we just had another rare instance of a tornado, so you better believe that they are going to be at the top of everyone's threat risk assessment for the next while. In 2010, we had our first significant earthquake here in Ottawa, so that was then the focus. In 2009, it was swine flu. In 2003, it was SARS. Now, of course, it's COVID-19. In actual fact, a basic power outage or even just winter weather is a bigger risk of disruption for Ottawa businesses. By bringing in an outside resource, these biases can be tempered a little and a more realistic threat risk assessment can result. The same can be said during the execution of the business impact analysis or putting the plan through a tabletop exercise. Heated discussions can arise when we start prioritizing people's work, and those may spill over into other aspects of your organization. The other factor to consider is how you're going to maintain your plan. If your business is small, stable, not experiencing a large amount of growth or change in processes and technology, you're probably fine to go about maintaining your plan with your own internal resources. However, if your industry is quite dynamic with high rates of change in the products you produce, how you produce them, and the personnel you hire and fire to support this, maintaining your plan can become a challenge. While you may have internal expertise, you have to consider how best to use that resource in a growing and changing environment. Lastly, compliance can be a factor to consider when evaluating whether or not you can benefit from consulting services. If you have a regulatory body or a client who insists on a third party to validate that your plan is solid, that you've exercised it and are maintaining it, well, you may have no choice but to bring in a consultant to address this. In addition, sometimes it helps to just add credibility to your plan in the eyes of your auditor or clients if you can demonstrate that you have a third-party expertise ensuring that your plan is solid. So if you're a small organization, you've got some internal expertise, what's the best bang for your buck when it comes to professional services? Assuming you're going to build your plan internally, you may want to consider bringing in a third party to help with exercising. Consultants can help you come up with a realistic scenario based on the real threats to your business and location. They'll also capture the lessons learned and make recommendations regarding how best to move forward, even if some of those recommendations are not necessarily super popular with some of the teams. Consultants don't need to work alongside your recovery team members day in and day out, so they can tell it like it is, even if someone's feelings get hurt. Your internal BCP resource does not have this advantage and can find themselves in some heated discussions with their colleagues following a contentious tabletop. If your organization is on the more dynamic side with a lot of growth and change anticipated, you may want to consider planned maintenance services, where your service provider takes care of some of the basic elements of your plan, such as just ensuring the personnel and vendor lists are up to date, the documents aren't growing stale, while your in-house expertise devotes their time to adapting to the plan to some of those larger organizational changes that are taking place. Having a gap analysis performed on your plan is a very cost-effective way of identifying holes in your plan that may expose you to findings by an auditor or a client. Sometimes when we're very close to something, we develop blind spots. With a gap analysis, you keep most of the work in-house, but can get kind of an unbiased look at your plan for a very low investment. If a more in-depth evaluation is required by a third party, then a more thorough plan audit can be performed to ensure that the plan contains all the necessary elements and that the required resources referenced in the plan actually exist. Of course, if you're strapped for internal resources because your in-house expertise is just stretched too thinly, then a threat risk assessment is a possibility, a business impact analysis, or even just a full plan development are always options that you can consider. Now, let's look at that small or simple organization that has no internal expertise. How do things change? When it comes to software, what considerations did they have? Again, their software needs are going to be very low for all the reasons we already mentioned. There just isn't the volume of information to manage. As we mentioned before, though, without expertise, you do need to consider how secure the information in your plan needs to be, who can and can't access that information, and whether you have third parties that are going to ask you to demonstrate how well you're maintaining your plan and how familiar your teams are with the plan content. Additionally, you may want to check to see what's included with your software. If you don't have any internal expertise, you may want to look at whether your software you're considering comes with any mentoring or whether you can get a discount on professional services when purchasing software. Just be careful, though, when looking at software pricing that you're not paying for more than you need on your software in order to get consulting services that are far more robust than you really need for the size of your organization. So you need to shop wisely there. So similar to the software needs of a small organization that has internal expertise, you're going to be looking at the same features with respect to software even when they don't have expertise. The two additional factors I've added here are mentoring. Anytime you can get a few hours of expertise included, hey, why not? And the inclusion of template content. If there's already template content included in your software, you have a structure you can start from, which will save you both time in writing your plan and head scratching trying to figure out where to begin. Now, when we get to consulting or professional services and there's no in-house expertise, sure, the needs may be greater, but they don't have to be. There are some key questions you're going to want to ask yourself. First, do you have any internal resources that could tackle this work, even if they don't have the skills yet? No need to pay a third party if some of your internal folks can do the heavy lifting. Second, how quickly do you need your plan? Well, you may have the resources. Can you get them up to speed with minimal guidance and education such that they can get your plan written in time for whatever regulatory or customer deadline you may be facing? Third, think about the long term when you embark on a BCP. How are you going to maintain and exercise your plan? A business continuity plan is a living document. It's going to be constantly changing and needs to be exercised to ensure it meets your needs and meets third-party requirements. Do you have the resources for this portion of the work? Do your internal resources have the time, with or without the expertise, to maintain the plan long term? We're seeing clients coming to us with the realization that they're not going to be able to build and maintain their plan themselves and are looking for services to cover everything from the plan development right through to annual maintenance and exercising. And lastly, do you think you need software? If so, you want to make sure your consultant knows how to use it. So the consulting services you may want to consider can range from everything you see on the left side of this table, from your threat risk assessment and business impact analysis, right through your plan development and then additional exercising and plan maintenance services. However, if you have the internal resources, you may want to simply go with some mentoring, where you have a consultant work with your internal resources for a couple of days, walking them through the process as it would apply in their organization and answering questions. The consultant simply provides a couple of days of guidance and then you let your internal resources do all the heavy lifting. Lastly, sometimes you find yourself in a funny situation where you had expertise, but they've moved on. So now you have a plan that's getting kind of old, and your inexperienced internal resources have decided to take on the responsibility. Again, a little mentoring can help here, but so can a gap analysis or a plan audit so that your new resource knows where to focus their energy to ensure your plan is complete and current moving forward. Now we're going to move on to larger organizations. Again, we get larger organizations coming to us with in-house expertise and without. So we'll start with those that have the expertise, and we'll start with the software considerations. With large organizations, to build and maintain a plan without software is pretty torturous and inefficient from the perspective of writing the plan, maintaining the plan, and even using the plan. In addition to some of the challenges we looked at for smaller companies around security, plan access, and compliance, large organizations have some additional considerations that they'll want to keep in mind when considering software. One that we often see overlooked is actually plan migration. When looking at software, be sure to ask about plan migration services to get your current plan, if you have one, imported into your new software tool. Depending on the level of the tool you're purchasing, you can get plan migration completed for free or for a very reasonable cost. Having the software provider migrate the plan for you can save you tons of time and see your plan incorporated into the tool in a manner that best leverages all the features that are available to you. This makes your plan more efficient to maintain going forward. In a large organization that needs to work from one master document, version control is key. You'll need to ensure that all teams are working from the same version of the plan and that you don't have multiple versions in circulation. So you want to make sure your software does this for you. As I mentioned at the start, when you are part of a large, complex organization, automation and efficiency are key. Be sure to ask potential vendors how their software can save you time when developing and maintaining your plan. If the vendor can't demonstrate how the application is going to make your life easier, then you need to move on to another vendor. BCPs in large organizations can get pretty giant and unwieldy. There's a lot involved in getting a large, complex organization up and running. All this content means that information can get stale fast. Team members can slip through the cracks in terms of keeping themselves updated on the planned content, and they can even just leave the organization unnoticed by the BCP coordinator. With the right analytical tools, your software can keep you apprised of who has been active in the tool, what sections are getting stale dated, and what team members have left the organization and need to be replaced by more current personnel. With vast amounts of information comes the need to be able to navigate all of this information and to ensure your users can easily find what it is they need at any given point during recovery. So ask your vendor how their tool makes it easier to quickly access information and navigate the tool. Just a note about what I haven't included here, and that is integration with internal systems. A lot of large companies come to us looking for points of integration between BCP software and their internal systems to make it easier for their users to access and maintain their plan day to day. While this can certainly add convenience, there are inherent risks associated with interdependencies between your BCP software and other systems. For example, if your software is set up to support single sign-on and your Active Directory goes down, so may your access to the very plan you need to continue business while your network access is in trouble. When considering any form of integration between your BCP software and your everyday systems, double, triple, quadruple check that then when one goes down, the other will not follow. It's absolutely critical that you have access to the information you need to recover, independent of the IT infrastructure you use for your everyday operations. All right, get off course on that topic. Now, what do we look for in software for these large organizations with expertise? You're going to want a threat risk assessment survey that will perform some analysis and automation to rank your threats for you and reduce the bias that can result in the latest disaster hitting the news being the first on your list of threats. Your business impact analysis is going to have to be a little more robust, with again some built-in analysis to show you what your critical processes are with your shortest recovery time objectives and the critical dependencies and resources required to support those. Look for an application with databases that house key information that can be entered once and used many times throughout your plan so that a simple phone number change does not generate multiple plan edits. Similar to smaller organizations, you're still going to want to be able to manage permissions so teams have access to the information they need and are not seeing information they shouldn't. But in addition to permissions, you're going to want to have different user role types as well so that you can put some limitations on who can read content and who can actually edit content. Also of value is some sort of last modified date to reflect when content was last updated and by whom. In addition, you'll want some more robust analytics and reporting that will tell you how current your information is and where you should be focusing your energy to keep your plan up to date. Built-in communication tools is another feature you may want to consider for a larger organization. Call trees are very inefficient and very prone to breakdown, and an independent communication product can leave you having to maintain personnel information in 2 different places, while integration allows you to send communications to the people that need them right from your BCP tool. Similar to smaller organizations, you again may want to consider a mobile app that will provide teams with offline copies of their plans on their mobile devices so that plans can be accessed anytime, anywhere, regardless of connectivity issues. And lastly, storage. While in smaller organizations, storage is not really an issue, as your organization grows in size, so may your document storage requirements. So just make sure the application you're considering will meet your storage needs. The considerations when it comes to services for a large organization that has internal expertise are not that different than a small organization. You can certainly do the work yourself as long as, again, your internal resources have the bandwidth. Similar to small organizations, professional services consultants can provide an impartial perspective and help teams to navigate through difficult questions around prioritizing their business processes without creating internal enemies once the project is over. If you do use software, you want to be sure your consultants are knowledgeable in how to use it, or again, you may be able to find a discount on software with whatever services you think your organization can benefit from, an option to consider. Lastly, similar to small organizations, you may find consultants can be helpful in fulfilling compliance obligations, such as verifying that your plan is complete and/or exercised, and adding credibility to your plan by demonstrating the involvement of expertise in your plan's development and maintenance. So As a large organization, you may be fine with completing all the steps that will lead you to the first draft of your plan, but you may want to consider a third party to help you with the exercising. Not only does this alleviate some burden from your internal resources, it also provides a fresh perspective and may result in uncovering some gaps that it would have otherwise gone unnoticed. Now, if you have the manpower but not the budget for professional services, you may consider a combination of internal exercising and just occasionally bringing in professional services to run an exercise. This is a little more budget friendly, but still provides you with that fresh perspective, maybe every second or third exercise, just to make sure your plan is not evolving in a vacuum. If manpower is a concern, you can certainly consider outsourcing portions of your plan maintenance. This becomes a more popular service among our clients who find that even with the best of intentions, their BCP never seems to reach the top of their to-do lists. Routine updates of personnel lists, vendor lists, and plan documents, along with chasing people down to execute outstanding action items, are just a few of the maintenance items you can consider outsourcing, so that your internal resources are just responsible for the major organizational changes, like when you add a new product or service, or you have a major change in your processes. The gap analysis, again, is helpful, particularly if you've had a major org change or a major change in who is now responsible for your BCP, or audit services if you have compliance requirements you have to meet. Of course, you can always hire somebody to do the heavy lifting at the start, getting your threat risk assessment and business impact analysis complete and your first draft written, and then leverage your internal resources to focus on the maintenance and exercising. Ultimately, there's a lot of flexibility in what services you might want to leverage if you're in this situation. So the last type of client we have to look at, the last organization, is the large organization that has no internal expertise. Ultimately, when it comes to software, you're looking at the same considerations as any large organization. How are you going to migrate your existing plan if you have one? Is this an included service? How do you know who updated what last? How is the tool going to make your life easier? What kind of analysis can the tool do for you, from ranking your threats to your business impact or business processes to letting you know what content needs to be updated? The biggest difference when you have no expertise in the BCP space is to consider whether you can get some expertise included in your software purchase in the form of mentoring. So you'll see the list of features for software is very similar to what we saw for the organization with in-house expertise, but here we are adding template content, mentoring services, as well as training. Similar to a smaller organization with no internal expertise, template content will save you a lot of time in writing your plan and help your inexperienced staff to get started. With respect to mentoring and training, when you have some BCP expertise, it's far easier to learn how to use BCP software. When you're new to BCP, you may find you need a little more orientation to a tool, but it shouldn't take you days. I've said reasonable training here because even if you need a few more features to meet the needs of a larger, more complex organization, it still shouldn't require days of training, and the vast majority of that training should be made available to you free of charge. It will come as no surprise that the vast majority of our consulting comes from medium to large organizations that have no internal expertise. You're going to need some degree of assistance in getting your BCP off the ground. However, it doesn't mean to spend a ton of money on a ton of services. Again, when you go seeking help in this area, here's some options to consider. First, do you have internal resources that can be devoted to this long-term and/or a training budget to bring them up to speed? As we've mentioned already, your BCP is an evergreen document. Once a consultant gets your first draft in place, there will be gaps that still need to be filled by executing action items that were identified along the way. The plan needs to be maintained and exercised. A program needs to be put in place to ensure personnel are aware of the plan, are trained on how to use the plan, and there are mechanisms in place to ensure the plan is updated when internal processes change. When evaluating resources, you'll want to weigh the costs associated with annual services from consultants versus an hourly employee and continue evaluating this from year to year. There will be a large upfront cost to get your plan written, but it may be more cost effective to pay consultants from year to year to exercise and help maintain the plan versus hiring someone to do this internally. This will depend largely on the size and complexity of your organization. There will come a point as you grow where it may be more cost effective to have full-time permanent staff dedicated to your BCP and to use professional services sparingly when the situation warrants it. Once you know whether or not you have resources, then you know what you're looking for long-term from services and to get appropriate pricing. If you suspect you're going to want exercising and maintenance services, ask for that pricing upfront when you're asking about plan writing services. Once a service provider gets to know your organization through the initial plan development phases, they will know how best to execute the plan maintenance and what scenarios might be good to exercise. They will be able to move right into plan maintenance and exercising. However, you don't want to build that relationship and then find out after the plan development is complete that exercising and maintenance services are way outside your budget, and now you have to start over with a new professional services organization. If you do have internal resources maintain your plan, but are going to go with professional services for developing the plan, try to identify those individuals before you dive into the plan development process. That way, these resources can sit through all of the plan development meetings and learn the BCP process firsthand from the consultants you hire. It becomes like built-in mentoring so that they're better prepared to take on those BCP responsibilities once the consultants have left. Of course, if you have or plan to use software, you'll want to make sure again that your consultants know how to use that software. So the services you might be looking for as a large organization with no expertise are those services that get your first draft together: risk assessment, business impact analysis, and plan development, potentially adding on maintenance and exercising, as well as the opportunity for mentoring either through a formal arrangement or simply shadowing the consultants through the initial plan development work. Now, another approach to consider, particularly if you have an older draft of a plan that has been somewhat neglected, but you have a renewed internal resource to work on reviving the plan, is to have a gap analysis performed. This will tell you if there are any major elements of your plan missing, particularly if you are now being requested to provide a copy of your BCP to a third party. Lastly, if you decide your internal resources are going to take a crack at getting your plan together and do all of the heavy lifting, you may want to again consider periodic exercising by external consultants to get fresh perspective on your plan, or have a plan audit completed to ensure your newly minted team has put a robust plan together for you. So in closing, when you're looking at software or services, consider the size and complexity of your organization and the resulting volume and complexity of information that is going to have to be synthesized in order to produce that initial business continuity plan. Consider how much expertise you have in-house, and more importantly, how much time these resources have to devote to the process, whether they have the expertise or not. And be sure to look at your needs, both short-term and long-term. You need to think upfront about how you'll maintain your plan and how much change you anticipate in your organization. And lastly, shop wisely. There are a lot of flashy software solutions on the market and approaches to BCP that can be far more complex than is required for your organization. There is some truth to the "you get what you pay for" phrase, but just make sure what you're paying for is what you really need. We unfortunately see a lot of clients coming to us because they've been oversold on something that's really way too complex and unwieldy for the size of their organization. So with that, I'm going to pass things back over to Don to see if we've had any questions that have come in that we can address in the last few minutes we have here.
Hey, Tam, thank you. Yeah, right now we do. We have a bunch of questions that came in. And I just want to remind everybody that's listening in today that you can still submit your questions by using the questions pane in your control panel. So let's get started here, Kim. Our first question is, do you think software can replace real interviews when developing your BCP?
Good question. I think you can get away with probably gathering a good portion of your business impact analysis data using software. But I think I don't think there's any software that can really tell you the best recovery strategies that are going to be most appropriate for a particular department or process. Software can give you a starting point, make suggestions, provide templates, but ultimately, I find there are aspects to recovery and business continuity that are very human, and I'm not convinced technology is quite there yet. It can certainly help. It can do some of the heavy lifting of that heavy data capture bit, but some of the synthesis needs to be evaluated with a more critical human eye and really adapted to the culture and the specific needs of your organization. So I guess the answer is it can replace some, but not all of what you need for your BCP.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, it's regarding software. Can having software make the consulting process faster, and in that case, perhaps save money on consulting costs?
Most software will make plan development faster, period, whether or not you have professional services or consultants coming in or not. But you do have to consider whether or not those professional services you're looking at having doing the work for you know how to use the software. That learning curve can certainly slow things down, but generally speaking, whether you're having professional services come in to write up your plan or whether you're developing the plan yourself, software is going to make the process faster. I know for us, for example, if our sales department asks me to provide an estimate on the amount of work required to complete a contract so that they can provide a quote, I certainly add extra time if they are not users of our software, as it will take me more time to get oriented to their plan structure and much more time to do plan updates, et cetera, and any edits to those plans that come in through the review process. So definitely you can save some dollars, I think, if you've got software in place and the professional services know how to use that software.
Thank you. Our next question is, excuse me, let me phrase this properly. What is the difference between a gap analysis and a plan audit?
So I can speak to how we deliver each of these. It will differ a little depending on the consulting company you go with. There's no real formal definitions, but the gap analysis is typically something we can complete remotely. We work with the client to determine what standard they would like us to compare with, from best practices to an ISO standard, whatever it is they want us to look at when comparing their plan to whatever standard they've chosen. And during the gap analysis, we're strictly just looking to ensure that the plan includes all the expected elements and that those elements appear to be complete. So for example, not only do we check that a business impact analysis has been completed, but that it's enterprise-wide, for example. If there's policies or procedures that are referenced but not included in the documents we receive, that's fine as long as the plan indicates they exist. We trust that this is the case and would not list their absence in the documents we received as a finding. The plan audit is more in-depth. All the initial steps are the same in terms of determining if there's a specific standard the client would like us to audit against, but the audit is typically completed on site so that we can verify that all supporting documentation that is referenced in the plan is verified. If there are policies and procedures referenced, we want to actually see those policies and procedures. Otherwise, that would be a finding. There's an element of demonstrating evidence that what is included in the plan is actually true and actually exists. Now, we haven't done an audit since the start of the pandemic, but obviously this would have to be modified a little bit. We would probably need to have the client provide us quite a bit more information and actually perhaps do some video conferencing to actually, verify that some of the things that they've claimed are in place are actually in place.
Okay, great. Let's see. Our next question. Can I purchase software? Oh, okay. Can I purchase software that can do a gap analysis for me?
Well, there's a gap analysis and then there's a gap analysis. You will find software that will verify for you that all of the boxes are ticked, basically, and give a report saying that all required pieces of the plan are, I'm going to say complete, but imagine some air quotes around that word complete, because there's a question of quality. I think we've all put some junk text into a box just so we can proceed to the next screen when we're using software. So just check that the gap analysis tool is not just checking that a box is ticked and that there's actually an element of quality checking that takes place, which I'll be honest is most often not the case when you're looking at a gap analysis that's built into a piece of BCP software.
All right. Okay, we have time for one last question. So here it is. If I'm considering software and consulting, what should I buy first?
No strict rule to follow here. We've had clients that do both, but here are some pros and cons. With software first, you have the consultants write the plan directly into the tool, and this avoids any plan migration costs once you do get your tool. And it gets your teams using the software from day one, as opposed to having to move from a big PDF document to a new tool. You do have the limitation of ensuring your professional services can use the software, and you don't have the experience of them to help you to determine what type of software you need. With consulting first, you don't have to worry about ensuring that your consultants know how to use a predefined tool. The consulting process may inform your software needs, but your deliverable may be a giant PDF document that you now have to get migrated into your software tool of choice, and then deal with the change management of users moving from a static document to a piece of software. Personally, I find change management within an organization is probably the more challenging issue to deal with. So if I was to give a recommendation or I had the option, I would certainly choose getting your software in place first, or at the same time as getting your professional services in, so that you can leverage getting your organization introduced to BCP via the software, and you don't have that change management piece of moving them from a PDF document to a piece of software that they then have to get comfortable with.
Okay, thanks again, Kim. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I want to thank you for your time today. And I want to let everybody know that if you do have questions we didn't get to today, or if you think of new questions, you can reach out directly to Tam via email. And I wanted to also let you know that we'll be posting a recording of this webinar on the Continuity Insights website in a few days if you missed any part of today's broadcast. And as you can see, we put up on the screen Tam's contact information, and you can reach her there with that email address and the phone number. So thank you again, Tam, and thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar, Turbocharge Your BCP. On behalf of Continuity Insights and our corporate sponsor, Kingsbridge BCP, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.